Dear participants, dear friends of the Global Digital Encounters, it is an honor and a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of Professor DeSantis and myself as co-directors of this activity and of Javier Fernandez-Laschetti as coordinator. It is really our pleasure to welcome you to a very, very special 10th Global Digital Encounter dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goals and intellectual property. How do the SDGs interact with intellectual property is a key issue. The COVID pandemic and the post-COVID pandemic show a revived importance of the Sustainable Development Goals because we realized, we as mankind, how weak we may still be on some aspects and how some broader objectives should be respected. How can IP support the Sustainable Development Goals? How will IP be affected by positively or negatively by the changes that the implementation of the SDGs suppose? This is what we shall review today. This is of great importance. We can talk about vaccines, we can talk about hundreds of subjects, we can talk about environment, but as such, the global objectives of mankind are all comprised in the SDGs. So as for this very, very special session, we have invited 3 exceptional speakers and moderators. First of all, Professor Edward Kwakwa, who is Assistant Director General of the World Intellectual Property Organization and is in charge of the Sustainable Development Goals in relation with IP. As such, Professor Edward Kwakwa, based on his long-standing experience in the UN, in academia, in the UN system as such, in many aspects of law implementing and law making, is a key person, is a key player in shaping this relation between the Sustainable Development Goals and intellectual property, and we are extremely honored and happy that he be with us today. We have as second speaker our eminent colleague, Professor Peter Yu from Texas A&M University, who by his contribution to the doctrine in intellectual property, including in the relation between intellectual property and SDGs, plays a key role and also plays a key role in shaping academia and academic variety in the field of intellectual property. So it is a real honor that you are with us. Your moderator is also an exceptional colleague, Professor Miriam Alena from Bocconi University, from my university, is Professor of Environment Law and Administrative Law. She lectured all over the planet, and including in the US at Berkeley, but also in many prestigious European universities and universities all over the world. She, thanks to her wealth of knowledge of environmental law and of the Sustainable Development Goals, she also constructs fascinating bridges between the topic of the SDGs and other topics that interest academia. So that's why we are so honored that she be our moderator today. I would wish, before moving and giving the floor to our coordinator, Javier Fernandez-Laschetti, to also thank our numerous sponsors from all over the world who have promoted the event and made that the hundreds of participants are connected from normally 50 to 60 to 70 countries. And we are very proud to say hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the entire planet. And also to sponsors and participants who form the family of the Global Digital Encounters. This is for us a real pleasure. This is the 10th encounter, a key one for a key subject, and I wouldn't wish to keep the floor an additional minute. The floor is really to our panel and also to our participants who in the chat will interact and raise questions that will be replied to now or in writing later on. Javier, my dear friend, Javier Fernandez-Laschetti, as coordinator of the activity, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laurent, and welcome you all to this 10th digital encounter. This is number 10. It's fantastic, and we will have more than 10, maybe 100, 1,000, who knows. Anyway, welcome you again. The topic for this session is especially important because I think that IP was created to foster and to protect innovation and creation. And innovation and creation are elements of a very high value in order to protect our planet, protect the environment. So IP must have a role on it. So thank you very much for coming. And remember, you belong to a community. We are looking for your comments, suggestions, papers, whatever you want to share with others. So as we create as we are creating a very big community. And that's all. I will pass the floor to Miriam, I think, to start speaking about the issue that will be the most important for all of us than my words. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both Laurent and Javier for this great introduction. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. It is, of course, a great pleasure for me to be a moderator of this 10th Global Digital Encounter, which, as mentioned, will focus on how to foster a dynamic IP system based on the Sustainable Development Goals. So just as a way of a short introduction, as you all probably know, the 70 Sustainable Development Goals are also known as the Global Goals. And they were adopted by the UN member states in 2015 as a universal call to action to end poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, as well as to ensure peace and justice for all people by 2030. So the 17 goals are the key means to implement the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. And we could say that they are, to some extent, the blueprint of the UN to achieve a better and more sustainable development for all. And even though, of course, we know it's difficult also to understand what a sustainable development for all means. Now, through the pledge to leave no one behind, the UN member states have committed to bring the world to zero poverty, zero hunger, zero discrimination against women, but also to ensure clean water and clean sanitation, affordable and clean energy, quality education. So, as you can see, these are really challenging goals. And what is important to underline is also that these 17 goals are integrated, which means that they recognize that action in one area will necessarily affect outcomes in other areas. And so they recognize that development must be capable to balance social, economic, and environmental sustainability. Now, in a world in which, as you know, intangible assets are going to be increasingly relevant, and they are already very relevant, the question arises. Is the intellectual property system duly equipped to respond to these challenges and to these needs? Let's take the example of COVID-19 vaccines, which was already mentioned by Laurent, and let's think of the issue of making the vaccines available to all the countries of the world, including developing countries. So the goal to leave no one behind. Well, As you may understand, this is nowadays probably one of the best examples of the challenges that the IP system has to face and increasingly will have to face in the new world. So against this framework today, we will analyze the relationships between intellectual property rights and the Sustainable Development Goals. And we will focus in particular on how IP can and will contribute to better meeting these Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, within the tradition of our encounters, what we want to do is to provoke you with some reflection. And our final goal is not to solve all these complex issues or to give definitive answers, but instead our goal is to make you think more broadly and deeply on how IP rights may be and very likely will be affected by the Sustainable Development Goals. And so as a final reminder, please remember that this encounter is meant to be an interactive dialogue, as Laurent mentioned. So I invite you all to raise your questions in the chat, and I promise that I will monitor it with great attention. So that said, to set the floor, we will discuss this topic with our two distinguished panelists. So dear Edward and dear Peter, of course, we are honored to have you today. And my first question, which I direct to Edward, is a broad question. And the question is why the Sustainable Development Goals are so important for IP. The floor is yours, Edward.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you. Let me start by thanking the organizers, in particular, Manuel, Laurent, Javier, and Alvaro, for organizing such an important dialogue. And it's a pleasure to be with my good friend Peter Yu as a co-panelist. And Miriam, thanks for moderating this. Now, Miriam, to your question. For me, there is no doubt that the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, together with its 17 Sustainable Development Goals, are the most ambitious agenda in human history. The most ambitious agenda in human history. It's an agenda that sets out a roadmap to end poverty. It sets out a roadmap to protect the planet. It sets out a roadmap to ensure that all people live in peace and prosperity. And in that sense, this encounter is a timely and useful opportunity for us to explore and discuss the linkages between intellectual property in the current global economy and the imperative of development. Now, as to why the SDGs are so important for intellectual property, let me just give two quick examples. In 2019, December, the UN passed a resolution on science, technology, and innovation for sustainable development. Miriam, as you just pointed out, the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted 2015 by the UN. So this is the same body that passes annual resolutions. This time the resolution was on science, technology, and innovation for sustainable development. And that resolution recognized the importance of the measurement of national innovation systems and made specific reference to Global Innovation Index. As you may know, this is the flagship publication by WIPO, and it was the first time that the Global Innovation Index had received such recognition from the UN's highest body, attesting to the increased standing of the Global Innovation Index as a reference tool for member states that are working towards strengthening of their innovation systems. Second quick resolution, and I know Peter is dying to respond to me. Second quick resolution was as recently as September 2020, a few months ago, the UN passes a resolution on consolidating gains and accelerating efforts to control and eliminate malaria in developing countries. That resolution recognized the importance of innovation in addressing the challenges to eliminating malaria, including, and this is the UN speaking, including the role of WIPO, in particular WIPO research. WIPO research is one of WIPO's public-private partnerships. I'm happy to talk about it, but it's a public-private partnership through which public and private sector organizations share valuable intellectual property and expertise with the global health research community. And this so they can promote development of new drugs, vaccines, and diagnostics, not necessarily for COVID, but more importantly, in respect of neglected tropical diseases, malaria and tuberculosis, diseases that are killing a lot more people a lot faster than COVID is. So maybe I'll end it on that note for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. So I'm really curious to know the opinion of Peter and what Peter has to respond to you on this point. So why the Sustainable Development Goals are so important for IP.
Thank you, Miriam. It's a pleasure to be here. I also want to join Edward in thanking the organizers, especially Laurent and Manel. I will pick up on the examples given by Edward as opposed to responding to what he said, because I actually agree with what he said, especially the examples he have provided to us. I think there are three main contributions Sustainable Development Goals can play. The first one is that it reminds us that IP is a means to an end, not an end in itself. And I think that's very important because when we try to push for stronger IP protections, sometimes we forget that we are trying to achieve certain goals. And I think the SDGs or the global goals will actually help us realize that, well, there's a means and fit that we need to explore in trying to plan our laws and policies in terms of the intellectual property area. The second thing, which is also quite important, especially in the intellectual property and global development debate, is that it will get us to think more about how IP is multidimensional. We need to have a holistic debate. And so if you look at the 17 global goals as well as the 169 targets, you can see that there are a lot of different things we need to achieve. And IP is not just for one area or two areas. And we need to think about how we can take advantage of the IP system going in multiple directions. And so I think the global goals can help us in terms of thinking about the direction of our efforts, but it can also help us to think more about the level of our efforts in terms of how much we need to push harder in terms of achieving sustainable development. And the last thing I'll end on is basically about legitimacy. I think it's always important to have a document and to have some consensus among the UN member states in terms of what we need to achieve to benefit the international community. And I think especially in these times with COVID, as well as with the ongoing negotiation of a lot of the bilateral, regional, and plurilateral trade agreements. And so it will be very helpful for us to go back to something that we can actually agree on and try to focus in that direction.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you also, Edward. So I think that before going a bit deeper on this point, let's just to set the floor for our audience, let's put the question the other way around. And so this question is directed again to Edward. So you explain why the Sustainable Development Goals are so important for IP. And so I ask now, why IP is so important for the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you, Miriam. Yes, another very important question. Maybe to respond to your question, let me give you a practical example to show why intellectual property is important for the Sustainable Development Goals. So in WIPO, we have a program we call the Inventors Assistance Program, officially launched in 2016. What this program aims to do is to level the playing field for inventors who have great ideas, who are great inventors, but who struggle to secure patents for their inventions due to a simple lack of funds. So I have a specific individual to give us an example. We have a Colombian physician and scientist called Antonio Gonzalo. It turns out Antonio Gonzalo from Colombia did get professional support from WIPO's recommended pro bono legal service assistance. Now, it turns out since the 1990s, Antonio Gonzalo had been working on an idea to save lives. His work was in remote rural health clinics in Colombia, up and down his region's mountainous roads. It turns out in these remote areas of Colombia, anytime we have the rainy season, the ambulances are unable to go and reach patients. So Antonio Gonzalo, what does he do? He heard about an ambulance that lost control, rolled over, and killed a young girl it was carrying, simply because of the terrain there. Antonio said to himself, I must come up with a solution. And what did he do? He invented a claw-like metal device that he suggested be used to clamp to the ambulances and other large vehicles to prevent them from sliding when there is mud. Now, in intellectual property, we all know when you have an invention, you need a patent to protect that invention. Antonio Gonzalo happens to be an impecunious physician, so he couldn't possibly afford going to try and file for patent protection. But he knew in order to translate his vision into a product that could prevent future tragedies, he had to get a patent. So he comes to WIPO, and WIPO puts Antonio in touch with the Inventors Assistance Program, and we are able to find a Colombian lawyer who provides pro bono services, and through that, Gonzalo is able to get the necessary patent registration procedure that gives him a patent. As a result, Miriam, guess what? Gonzalo's invention has now grown into a family business, and it's a life-saving tool for most of Colombia's rural health system. So we give this as an example of the importance intellectual property plays when we are talking about sustainable development goals. They go hand in hand.
Thank you very much, Eduardo. That was a really interesting experience. And so I ask Peter now, why, in your opinion, intellectual property is so important for the Sustainable Development Goals? Is it true that they go hand in hand, as Eduardo mentioned, or what's your thought on this?
I think Edward captured the debate very well. When you think about the global goals, science, technology, and innovation are important to every one of them, right? Whether you're thinking about health, food security, education, renewable energy, water, or climate change. And so I think what Edward get us started in terms of talking about how it provides the incentive framework for inventors, for creators, I think that's very important. Typically, when we think about intellectual property, we talk about the basic IP regime, copyright, trademark, patent, and trade secret. But at the same time, we can also think about other regimes that are within the intellectual property area. Geographical indications is a very good example. There's been ongoing discussion about how to protect genetic resources, and traditional knowledge is another good example. So I think intellectual property is beneficial in the sense that you provide the incentive frameworks in different directions, depending on the specific needs of each individual country. And it can also help in terms of providing some type of facilitation. For example, it can promote commercialization, it can facilitate licensing, it can help transfer and diffusion of technology. And so there are a lot of benefits provided by intellectual property. Now, one question that I suspect will come from both the panel as well as the audience is that, well, we have heard a lot of concerns about the current intellectual property system, especially during COVID. And my response is that, yes, there are a lot of problems, but at the same time, I think it really depends on what type of level of protection we have for each country, right? And that's why this international debate is very important, because we actually need to get the countries to agree on what type of minimum standards will be suitable for the international community. And the difficult issue with respect to that is that different countries need different innovation frameworks. Different countries need different support in terms of technology transfer or in terms of licensing. And so I think that is going to be something that is going to continue in the current debate with respect to what are the benefits of intellectual property to the Sustainable Development Goals and what are some of the drawbacks. One thing I would end on is that a lot of the current IP protections seem to benefit a lot of the developed countries at the expense of developing countries. And that's a debate that's been going on for about 20 years now. And so I think that will continue in terms of development. But one thing that is worth pointing out is that a lot of the large developed countries are now taking advantage of the intellectual property system too. They have been very successful in turning around the economy or improving the technology. And so I think that is also a lesson, I think, for a lot of people in terms of how intellectual property can also help a lot of countries if you actually adapt the system to the level that's suitable based on local conditions.
Thank you very much, Peter. I think on this, I can see that Edward wants to respond. I can see from his face.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, Miriam, I didn't know you were a face reader, but you are correct. And Peter, I just wanted to respond to the very last point Peter made about the fact that I guess there is a perception problem with intellectual property in the sense that the impression has been given it's only developed countries participating or benefiting from the intellectual property system. That definitely traditionally is true, but then I want to go to, and this is just something hot off the press today. WIPO held a press conference this morning to release annual statistics on intellectual property indicators across the board. So now guess what happens today? When you go to the official press release, it turns out this particular year, we are talking about 2020 statistics. The Patent Cooperation Treaty, and here we are talking about levels of innovation, registrations for patent filing. It witnessed an increase of 4%, increase, not decrease, in 2020 when we had the global pandemic. But more importantly, of that 4% increase, pretty much the first 7 countries on the list with the highest percentage increases were developing countries, not developed countries. For example, Saudi Arabia, it turns out in 2020, Saudi Arabia's patent application filings under the PCT increased by a whopping 73%. Malaysia, it increased by 26%. Chile, it increased by 17%. And even Singapore, the developing countries that most people say is the most developing country, their PCT patent application filings also increased by 15%, 1-5. So the simple point I'm making is the developing countries are now very big players in the intellectual property system. And I don't think they can any longer be discounted when it comes to what role they are playing, whether in actual registration systems or in norm setting discussions and other intellectual property fora. Thank you.
Edward, I'm so glad you mentioned the release this morning. This is actually the first thing I look at this morning before the talk. I think I have a feeling that this is actually released just in time for our panel right here. But if you look at the top 40 in terms of PCT applications, 7 of them are actually from developing countries, right? So it's actually very interesting. We have the BRICS countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, as well as Malaysia and Thailand, right? They are all within the top 40. If you look at the statistics with respect to the Madrid Protocol, you can also find Vietnam within the top 40. Right, so it's actually quite exciting in terms of how some of the countries have been taking advantage of the IP system, whether we're talking about the PCT or Madrid.
Thank you very much, both of you. So I can see that you both agree on this point that developing countries are now playing an increasingly relevant role when it comes to intellectual property rights. So I would like to try to be a bit more provocative. So in your view, and I ask Edward first and Peter second, are the Sustainable Development Goals compatible with the way we have understood intellectual property in the last decades? Or should we change the way we look at intellectual property rights and intellectual property rights regulations? Edward, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Yes and no. I say yes because, yes, I agree that in the sense in which Peter pointed out, there is a perception that developed countries are the only ones for whom intellectual property matters as much or who participate as effectively. I think one sense in which we need to shift our paradigms in looking at intellectual property is that we need to go beyond normal stakeholders to address new and emerging stakeholders. In particular, I'm thinking of the youth, for example. The youth are the future of innovation and creativity, and there is no reason why we shouldn't target them as a specific constituency in trying to preach the virtues of intellectual property and what an important part it plays in our daily lives. Similarly, I would say, apart from having to reach out specifically to the youth, intellectual property, to my mind, must now be seen as relevant and exciting to our political and industry leaders, not just to legal luminaries or to engineers. Intellectual property must be embraced by politicians, by industry leaders, even by the person on the streets, as the Brits would say, the man on the Clapham omnibus. This is very important for the intellectual property system. At the same time, we need to connect the intellectual property ecosystem more closely to the enterprise and economic ecosystems. We are not just talking intellectual property, but we are also talking enterprises and economic systems. In particular, we need to go beyond just ordinary registration of intellectual property to helping that registration of intellectual property go to the market. How do we? Because this is particularly important for startups, for small and medium-sized enterprises. It's important for entrepreneurs. And that's why in WIPO, our new Director General has just created a new sector. We call it the Intellectual Property and Innovation Ecosystem sector, focusing specifically on this area. Thank you.
Thanks, Edward. So what you mentioned is really interesting, but Then I have another question again for you, but you say that intellectual property can be a positive tool. So my doubt is how can it be a positive tool despite all the complications for enforcing, for instance, compulsory licensing on patents, despite all the limitations on knowledge transfer due to IP rules that protect trade secrets, for instance?
Thank you, Miriam. Yes, I say intellectual property can be a positive tool because, for example, I just mentioned WIPO research. This is the public-private partnership that has been recognized in a United Nations resolution. You don't have that happening every time. But what does WIPO research do? It's very important in the sense that it's 8 of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies who are the founding partners, as it were. They have each agreed to contribute their intellectual property assets into a pool. That pool goes to assist researchers from developing countries who are researching diseases, in particular neglected tropical diseases, malaria and tuberculosis. We all know these are diseases that are not of importance. They don't have a high market value for pharmaceutical companies. And that is why a pharmaceutical company would be more likely to spend research and development money on ailments relating to cancer, for example, as opposed to ailments relating to malaria, which you normally only find in tropical developing countries. So WIPO research is ending up pouring money into research and development for diseases that are having a very heavy burden on developing countries, low and middle income countries, as well as least developed countries. And through a program like that, we are able to show that intellectual property can actually be a force for good because it helps us sustain and to contribute to some of the sustainable development goals. In this case, sustainable development goal number 3, dealing with good health, public health, etc. I have another example on WIPO Green, but I don't want to monopolize with examples from WIPO. So I'm happy to come back and give more examples if you are interested, Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. So let's see some of the questions that came from the audience. Well, some experts argue that most patent applicants in Africa are in fact non-residents, and more importantly, they argue that the sectors where patent applications are most frequently filed are related to the extraction of raw materials. And so in light of this, can it really be said that so far patents in African countries are actually being used to promote sustainable development? And this is for Peter, if Peter wants to reply.
I think we tend to focus a lot on who is the applicant and who is the owner of the patent. But at the same time, I think when we have the intellectual property system working, a lot of the knowledge, a lot of the technology will get diffused to different members of the community, whether they are being hired as employee, whether they actually get a chance to work on the new technology, whether they get inspired to actually go in the same direction as some of these companies or want to be a creator or inventor themselves. I actually picked up Edward's point on how we need to pay more attention to the youth, and I think it's quite important. I think what is interesting from my standpoint, having taught for about 2 decades, is that the preference for innovation models from my students have been changing from the time I started teaching to now. And so I think that is going to be quite interesting, both for policymakers as well as for other stakeholders within the IP system in terms of what the younger generation actually prefer in terms of how they're going to do innovation. But I think going back to that question, I think a lot of the things that can be triggered by pattern activities, trademark activity, or even activities in the publishing industry, are not limited to only who is owner of the IP rights, but also to other stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Peter. So, Edward, what do you think on this point?
Thank you, Miriam. I was actually going to respond to this, but then my response is more to do with the overall theme that we have for the global digital encounters. And I hope Laurent and Javier and Manuel will forgive me for saying this, but I know the overall theme is the role of intellectual property in a new post-crisis world. The role of intellectual property in a new post-crisis world. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, but the idea of a post-crisis world or even a post-COVID-19 world is highly questionable. It's questionable because it implies that we are past the worst and that it's just about recovery now. We've gone past the worst and we just need to concentrate on recovery or the post-crisis world. Then again, if environmental science and medical science for that matter tell us anything, it is that the worst is yet to come. And I don't mean to be a doomsayer, but I think we must learn from history that the crisis will pick up speed as we continue to degrade the environment. And I'm mentioning the environment because we are talking about sustainable development goals. The environment is key in those sustainable development goals. And that is why the message around COVID-19 and climate change, for example, has been so important. COVID-19 is simply, it's both a dress rehearsal and what's to come in terms of impact on the human population. It's a tremendous opportunity, I think, to do what we've been told was not possible, and that is rapid and disruptive change to the way we live and consume. And clearly, science previously estimated that we would start to see the more severe impacts of environmental degradation in the coming 50 to 100 years. Well, the rate of change has been dramatically faster than original estimates indicated, including the loss of permafrost, average global temperatures that are reaching record-breaking heats, and even ocean warming. So I think, again, with all apologies to Laura and the originators of this fantastic idea, I just wanted to point out the idea of post-crisis, it definitely is not. We are not in a post-crisis phase yet, although the digital encounters are assisting us in going towards that post-crisis phase. So unfortunately, as at now, all the signs indicate that this is just the beginning, including insofar as the emergence of new diseases is concerned, and that the brunt of many of these changes will be felt in our lifetimes. Again, I don't mean to be a doomsayer, but I'm just saying what I see on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. So then I can see, so you both mentioned the two pillars, let's say, of on the one side, innovation, and on the other side, the sustainable development goals. So we have another question from the audience, which is very interesting. So the question is that to some extent, innovation, we know it's essential to achieve the goals, the sustainable development goals. However, it is our global economic approach which is at the same time causing the lack of sustainability, especially in terms of the protection of the environment, as Edward was mentioning. And so, in your view, is it possible that the basic concepts of IP will be amended to encourage a less growth-based and consumer-based economy in order to set, let's say, the stage for the future, for a future role of intellectual property. Peter, you can answer first.
So this is a difficult question to answer in the sense that I think we have to assume that a lot of the people will be willing to change the behavior. And as we have seen with respect to COVID, I think some are definitely willing to make adjustment, and some have been doing that proactively, whereas we also have seen a lot of resistance coming from different corners. And so I think it's going to be very complicated in terms of how to go forward. But one thing I think is quite important is that we need to think about whether there are other paradigms within the IP field that can be quite beneficial to sustainable development as well as the international community. And to the extent that we are focusing on consumers or we are trying to change the culture, I think we can also look at how those paradigms can be quite helpful. And so when you asked me the previous question about patent, my immediate reaction is that maybe focusing on the patent statistics from African countries might not necessarily be the best way to measure the contributions of IP to sustainable development in that particular region. Maybe we should look at other type of innovation models to see how they have actually been increasing the capacity both for innovation as well as for research development. And I think that will be quite important. The other thing which I think will also be quite important is to think about the different alternative models that people are exploring, right? One thing that I think is quite beneficial and interesting from the pandemic is that we have a lot of new models coming from international bodies, coming from NGOs, coming from academics, and coming from members of the public, right? People are willing to cooperate more than we have anticipated. And they have also considered different mechanisms, whether we are talking about technology access pool, we are talking about some of the initiatives in terms of partnerships, COVAX facility, and also the willingness for a lot of the publishers, a lot of the companies to actually make their intellectual property available to people to use to combat COVID or pledge to make them available during COVID. I think those are the new initiatives that is worth paying more attention to. I think one thing that is quite interesting about COVID is that when we are in a situation where we actually need to take action, a lot of people can actually come up with very interesting ideas that we can explore where that actually will make the world better.
Thank you very much, Peter. So I think we have a question from the audience which is connected to what you were just saying. So what is, in your view, and I'm asking this to Edward first, what is the overall impact of non-traditional innovation models, as for instance, open innovation or collaborative innovation, and what impact they have on the achievement on the Sustainable Development Goals? For instance, the shift in innovation process and the subsequent attribution of ownership. So what is the impact of these new models on the Sustainable Development Goals?
Thank you, Miriam. Yes, I have no doubt, and this is actually a subject that is dear to me. You're talking about new forms of intellectual property. Now, we all know in the past, anytime one mentioned intellectual property, attention immediately went to the well-known patents, trademarks, designs, copyright, geographical indications. Clearly, we need to start looking seriously at other models, other types of intellectual property. Let's take genetic resources, for example, and this is in the specific context of Sustainable Development Goals. I would suggest that from the creation of vaccines to fight against COVID-19, to the development of new food crops that are resistant to the effects of climate change, the use of genetic resources for innovation is today much more important than it ever has been, and it's a key to human welfare and sustainable development. So it's not just genetic resources and access to that we need to look at. We need to look at various forms of traditional knowledge. We need to look at various forms of traditional cultural expressions. And as you may know, in WIPO, we have an intergovernmental process going on that is looking specifically at how best to protect these non-traditional forms of intellectual property, because I do believe they do have a major role to play in achieving the goals of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. But just very briefly, when we talk about the intellectual property system as a whole, and we talk about things like norm setting, or how do we use the IP system to take care of problems we have today, we all know there's a problem we are facing in multilateralism. So the traditional norm setting method, for example, treaty making, is definitely very slow, probably too slow to be able to cater to the needs we have in the intellectual property system. And for that reason, I believe in addition to looking at other non-traditional forms of intellectual property, we should also be looking at non-traditional forms of norm making, such as, and the UN will say this is not non-traditional, it is traditional, such as resolutions, declarations, etc. We probably should move closer to the soft law mechanisms, use platforms, public-private platforms, for example, to try and set the agenda and set guidelines that hopefully will be followed. And of course, we all know, you look at the human rights field, for example, the 1948 Declaration on Human Rights, it was a mere declaration, and yet it has become deemed more binding than your hard type of treaty. So these are forms of norm setting we need to have the intellectual property system look at. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edward. I'm curious to know what Peter thinks on this point. So about the new form of new models of intellectual property.
I think those new forms of negotiations. So let me start by pick up on what Edward says about soft law, and then I'll get into the new forms of the models. So I think when we think about, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, right, we can see a lot of the developments are already going in a direction that Edward is talking about, right? So I can see how a lot of the developments will be useful in the intellectual property debate. I think the challenge for us is how can we tie the ongoing negotiations of the multilateral or non-multilateral treaties to other debates, right? So we have a lot of development with respect to human rights, with respect to biological diversity, with respect to climate change. And I think the challenge for us is to figure out how not to let all this discussion to be in different silos, how we can actually get them together so that there will be more interaction and there will be more linkage between the different agreements. Whether we are talking about hard law, whether we talk about soft law, I think that will be quite important. And with respect to the alternative models, I think is a very good way to pick up on what I started off talking about, how we have explored different models, especially during COVID. And one thing I strongly believe in is that the more suitable models that are available to a lot of the developing countries or different type of individuals that are within whether developed or developing countries, the more likely they believe that the system will provide more benefit to what they've been trying to do. I think one challenge with respect to the current international intellectual property regime is that it started more than 2 centuries ago. And when you think about what happened at that time, obviously a lot of the issues will be important to, at that time, the developed countries. And so it will take a while before the developing countries will get their voice in the process, and to actually include a lot of those issues that are on the agenda. And so there's still a work in progress. But at the same time, I think as we are moving in a direction where more and more developing countries are getting more benefits from the system, whether we talk about the traditional forms of IP or whether we talk about new forms of IPs, I think there will be more opportunities available to I think the different type of countries. One thing that I think it will be quite important for us to think about going forward is that we are no longer just talking about the North and the South. Now, a lot of the countries are actually very divided, even within the developing world, right? So then the question is, well, how are we going to find a suitable regime or suitable model for different countries in light of the ongoing challenges? I think that is going to require more effort, and I strongly encourage policymakers, commentators, or whoever you are in the audience to actually start thinking more about how diverse the developments are, even within the developing world.
Thank you very much. So this is actually really interesting. And so just to pick up one of the final questions, because then time is running out. So what do you think about the idea of suspending intellectual property rights on vaccines as it was discussed recently because of the pandemic? Edward, you can answer first, if you like.
Thank you, Miriam. I was hoping this question would not come up just because it's such a hot potato. Yes, so as I understand it, first of all, the discussions are going on at the World Trade Organization, and as we all know, it's the WTO that is the repository, and that is the depository for the TRIPS agreement, so they are administering it. It's clearly a discussion going on among the WTO members. WIPO, my organization, is but an observer there. So you'll be surprised to know most of these discussions actually take place in informal sessions, not in formal sessions. As an observer, WIPO is allowed to participate in the formal sessions to make statements and to be as effective as it can be. Unfortunately, because most of the discussions take place in the informal sessions at WTO, observers such as my organization cannot participate in the discussions on the waiver, which probably is just as well because, again, it's a TRIPS issue. It doesn't concern as such any of the specific 26 treaties that WIPO administers. But in general, my take on this would be, I don't think anyone is suggesting that intellectual property itself is what is an obstacle to the problem with vaccines. For example, you have Pfizer, they are able to develop a vaccine, and it turns out their problem is actually production capacity. So Pfizer decides, let's combine with BioNTech, a German company, or let's license it to the Serum Institute in India, and they have the necessary manufacturing capacity, and they can produce the vaccines using the same patentable formula that Pfizer has come up with. So in that sense, I don't see that we have a problem. There is the COVAX facility, which is administered by the WHO. On that, I'm happy to say just a few days ago, the COVAX facility delivered 600,000 doses to Ghana. That was the first developing country they had delivered the vaccines to. Ghana happens to be my home country. Of course, we all know 600,000 doses are peanuts, but it's a symbolic gesture to show the multilateral system is rallying behind the worst pandemic we have seen in a long time, and trying to show how the international community must follow certain protocols to ensure it's not the intellectual property system, it's not the public health system, it's not the multilateral trading system that is preventing the needed access to these vaccines that are expected to ameliorate the conditions we are going through. So the long and short answer I've given is simply to make the point, yes, I know India and South Africa have come up with this proposal, and I know lots of other countries have subsequently endorsed their proposal and joined them as co-sponsors. But we also know there are a lot of countries on the other side, including the United States, Switzerland, European Union, etc., that are opposed to the waiver because in their view, it's not a waiver as such that would take care of the problems we are faced with in the pandemic. And that's the sense in which I am glad the Global Digital Encounters number 10 is talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, because I do believe adherence to those Sustainable Development Goals is one of the most effective means through which we can effectively tackle the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you, Edward. Peter, what's your perspective on this last question? So the proposal of suspending IP rights on vaccines. Just a few minutes, if you can give us your point of view.
So I've been on record being supportive of a lot of initiatives to help developing countries to combat COVID. I think it's very important for us to think about the different type of adjustment. Some of them is currently within the TRIPS agreement, and that provides a lot of flexibilities, whether we think about Article 30 for limitation exceptions, Article 31 for compulsory licensing, or Article 73 on national security. Those are the flexibilities that are actually allowed under the TRIPS agreement. And then there are the proposals about TRIPS adjustment, and that's where the waiver comes in. And I'll get to that a little bit more. And then we also have a lot of developments, as we mentioned early on in the panel, about TRIPS extra development that are outside the TRIPS agreement, whether we talk about the technology access pool, CTAP, or whether we are talking about the COVID pledge or COVAX facility. Those are outside the TRIPS agreement. The reservation I have with respect to the waiver as is currently drafted, there are a number of them. The first one is that I fear that this waiver will not be for this pandemic. By the time we actually can get countries to agree on the waiver and have it fully ratified by 2/3 of the WTO membership, it will take a while, right? So if you look at the last amendment to a TRIPS agreement, Article 31 bis, it took more than 10 years to actually get it ratified by 2/3 of the WTO membership. I'm hoping that the pandemic will not go beyond a decade from now, right? So any effort that we're going to push for the waiver will likely be for the next pandemic. I think one thing that is quite important for us to remember is that this is not going to be the last pandemic we're going to see, right? SARS started in the early 2000s, and now we have COVID. So in just this millennium, we have already seen 2 major pandemics that are wreaking havoc throughout the world. And so I think it's important for countries to start thinking about whether adjustment is needed with respect to the future pandemics, not just about COVID. The second thing which I also have reservation is that any discussion, whether we talk about WTO or WIPO, involve a lot of the concessions, negotiations, bargaining, right? So we cannot just ask for a waiver without providing things in return in order to get certain countries that are now opposing the waiver to the table. And then the question is, well, what are we going to offer in order to actually get them interested to go to the table to negotiate, right? And so I think that is something that is worth considering, especially in light of the tactics. And the final thing I would end on is basically about thinking about whether we actually make adjustment as opposed to the waiver. Right. So one of the benefits of the adjustment is that you can actually suspend the IP rights, but at the same time you can also add a longer term to the IP rights after the pandemic, right? So that actually will be more palatable, at least I think, for a lot of developing countries in terms of how a lot of the rights holders are not just going to lose the rights and not get anything in return. But at the same time, I think the big issue, if we're going to go in that direction, is to decide when the pandemic will actually end and when it will end for different individual countries. And that is going to be very difficult It's easy for us to know when it has actually been considered as a pandemic, but it's much harder for us to say when we actually need to stop taking action to address the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you also, Edward. I think this discussion has been really great and exciting, at least from my perspective. But I think I can express the feeling of our audience. So unfortunately, the time is over, and so we should come to the conclusion. Well, I'm not going to do a proper conclusion, but I just would like to let you know what is my feeling after this very exciting discussion. Well, my feeling is that, of course, I'm not an expert on intellectual property rights. I'm an expert in environmental law. And the first, what I can see is that intellectual property shares a lot of commonalities with environmental law. We have mentioned some of them. For instance, the multidimensional character of IP, the need for an holistic approach in order to tackle all the challenges that IP and the IP regulation will have to face in the next years. But at the end, what I can say is that probably IP, intellectual property, has to change, has to evolve. And again, this is something that environmental law constantly does as well, because this is part of its own character. But yes, my feeling is that IP law has to change, but still it is probably at the very core of sustainability. So my impression is really that intellectual property and sustainability are intertwined, and so to some extent we have to make them work well together, and this is the challenge that we have. And you, as intellectual property researcher and practitioners and expert amateur, you have to do. So I really thank you, our panelists, for this great discussion, and I leave the floor to Manuel, who will close the today encounter. Thank you very much again, also to our audience, for the wonderful questions.
Thanks very much, Miriam. Thank you very much. You have run the discussion in such a magnificent way. And thanks also to Edward and to Peter for such an alive and fascinating discussion. Yeah, you know, there was so much food for thinking in your words. Yeah, in the post-crisis world, Edward. So Edward, thanks for your remark. You are right. What we have learned from this crisis is certainly that crises are not cyclical anymore. Yeah, crises have become systemic. Yeah? Which means that the whole issue is not how to get rid of the crisis, but how to learn to navigate along the crisis. So that's why, Edward, we have to always understand the post-crisis as a long-term scenario, yeah? Which means that we have encountered for at least 50 years more, let's say. Yeah. But as Peter rightly said, now it is time to change our behaviors. Yeah. I would like also to thank to all of you, hundreds of loyal members of this Encounters community who come back every month to enjoy for 1 hour with us. Yeah, and I'd like to recall today our students from all over the world. Those who have prepared thoroughly the references we have provided, yeah? Those who have attended the encounter and now are going to devote time and effort to develop the consequences of the measures you have provided to them. Yeah? We aim, as you know, to engage more and more IP students in the next encounters. Yeah? And I assume, Miriam, that today we have all the students from Bocconi University on board. Yeah. We are also very happy to announce that the Encounter Support Group has been enlarged this week with 4 brilliant doctorals and doctoral candidates. Yeah. They are Ariela Berdin from Trinidad Tobago, Julia Borisova from Russia, Florence Beard from France and the United States, and Luz Sanchez Garcia, doctor from Spain. So welcome to all of you, to this amazing network of young scholars. No doubt also, if any of you, so those who are attending the encounter, fulfill the conditions, you are eligible for joining the club of the Encounter Support Group. Yeah, the conditions are very easy to fulfill. Two. One is being a PhD candidate or a doctor less than 10 years. And second, obviously, mastering English language. Yeah, then you can ask to join the Encounter Support Group, and you are very welcome. Yeah, our aim is networking young scholars from all over the world. So if you know a person who could join the group, please let us know. Yeah, it is time to close and to announce officially the 11th Global Digital Encounter. This time, another amazing topic: geographical indications and traceability. So we wait for all of you on Tuesday, April 6th, to join a wonderful team of academics and professionals from all over the world, as in the other encounters. Hope you are doing fine. Hope you have enjoyed this discussion. Now it is time to digest it and, of course, to enjoy the rest of the day. We do expect to see all of you on April 6th for our 11th encounter. So take care, please. Take care. Bye-bye, my dears. Bye-bye. Thank you for coming.